Shabbat Shalom. Chag Sameach. So, there's an interesting conversation. Our ancestors experienced coming out of slavery into freedom. And I can only imagine what that felt like. Do we have it better here in the United States, where we don't feel God's presence quite the same way they did? But we certainly are blessed with that many more miracles on a daily level, that much more sustenance, ample everything. And I was reminded of this as I was thinking just a couple weeks ago. Here we are, of course, in Pesach. We've given up our beloved bagels. In order to remember that our ancestors, when they came out of Egypt, survived on manna that fell from heaven. True story that actually happened, is what Rabbi Groner would say. We were sitting at Minyan breakfast about 2 weeks ago. I had a bar mitzvah boy next to me. It was a Monday morning. He had read Torah that morning. And he's looking out the window. And he says, "Rabbi, a bagel just fell from the sky." I looked at him, and his parents and I looked out the window. And sure enough, a squirrel must have gotten a hold of a bagel, brought it up a tree, but couldn't make it all the way, so the bagel quite literally fell down from the sky. So I said to him, our ancestors thought they had it good. They had manna falling from heaven. We've got bagels falling from the sky. That's how good we have it in America. Which has absolutely nothing to do with my Devar Torah, but I was waiting for them to finish passing out the sheet. So here we are, the first day of Passover. Thank you, our congregational president, Larry Niemer, synagogue officer, Rick Cohen. They nonstop help. Janice Soman on the Bima. Here we are in the midst of our Seders, and of course we're going through Seder night. We're going through the Haggadah. We have our first glass of wine. And we begin telling the story, answering the questions that our children have asked us, begin telling the story of the Exodus, of God's miracle par excellence for the Jewish people. And we're going through the Maggid section, we're telling the story, and of course we come to the ballad of the four sons. Said the father to the children. How did you all remember that way too? At the Seder we will run. Sorry. I can keep going for that. That's not what that sign meant. And we're challenged, of course, the Chaldor Vador Chayav Adam Nerot Atzmo Ke'ilu Hu Yatzami Mitzrayim. In each and every generation, we're supposed to see ourselves as if we ourselves left slavery for freedom. So we have to ask ourselves, who in our own day and age are the four children? Who today is the wise, the wicked, the simple, and the one who doesn't know how to ask questions? Who in our own day and age are the four children? And of course, we go through each aspect of the Seder, and certainly the Maggid section, reading about our past but projecting it to our own day. And I wanted to take a moment to just look at a small section of the Haggadah that stands out as somewhat odd in the midst of Seder night. So we come, and I'm at the very top of the page where it says Passover 2016. A tale of Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Elazar, son of Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Tarfa. They were reclining at the Seder in Bnei Barak, and they spent the whole night long telling the story of the going out of Egypt, until their pupils came and said to them, "Our masters, it is time to recite the morning Shema." How many of you have noticed this in your Haggadah? And just sort of glance by. We just keep going, right? It's in most every Haggadah. We read it, we say well and good, and we keep going. What in the world does it mean? Our masters, it's time to recite the morning Shema. Now, what you have to know about this section, this midrash, is Rabbi Akiva was the youngest of these rabbis. Rabbi Akiva was the least experienced of all of these rabbis. Now, how old was Rabbi Akiva when he started his Torah study? 40. Rabbi Akiva didn't start his Torah study until he was 40, though he became one of the greatest sages of all time. And so it's interesting that of all of these rabbis, who was located in Bnei Barak? Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shua, Rabbi Elazar, and Rabbi Tarfon all came to Akiva's house for Seder that night. And that's where they asked the question or made the statement, "Our masters, it's time to recite the morning Shema." So let's take a moment and learn about this Rabbi Akiva. We are now in the Talmud, Tractate Makot. And once after the destruction of the temple, Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Yeshua, and Rabbi Akiva. So a different group of rabbis, but nevertheless this group of rabbis, were traveling on the road. And they heard the sound of the Roman crowds in the plaza of Rome, 120 mil away, a little ways away. And they started to weep. But Rabbi Akiva was smiling. Right now, let's contextualize what's going on. This is roughly the 2nd century of the Common Era, probably about 130 CE. The Romans have already destroyed the Holy Temple. The Romans have taken over the land of Israel. Greek influence, Roman influence is throughout the land. Yet our rabbis are trying to make one more rebellion against Rome. They're going to try one more time to cast off the yoke of the Romans and establish Jewish autonomy once again in the land of Israel. Now, who was the military general they were looking to lead them? A man named Bar Kokhba. You may have heard of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, the Bar Kokhba revolt. This is that time. Who is the spiritual leader of that rebellion? Rabbi Akiva. So all of these rabbis start weeping when they see these Romans. Rabbi Akiva starts smiling. These rabbis, they ask him, "For what reason are you smiling?" He replied to them, "And for you, why are you weeping?" They answered him, "These heathens who bow down to idols and burn incense to idolatry live in security and calm. And as for us, the house which is the footstool of our God, the holy temple, is consumed in fire. Shouldn't we weep?" Rabbi Akiva then explained why he smiled in the face of tragedy. He said to them, "For this reason I am smiling. For if such is the reward for those who transgress his will," right? If calm and security is the reward for those who transgress God's will, then for those who do God's will, how much more so? How much greater reward can they expect? Rabbi Akiva certainly saw the glasses half full. He saw the silver lining of the cloud. And he said, if here these people who are not only non-Jews, but really against the Jewish people, if they can live in security and calm, imagine how much more so one day those of us who believe in God, those of us who worship God, how good it's going to be. How peaceful and how calm and how secure and how safe it will be one day because we fulfill the mitzvot. If those who don't do the commandments enjoy some level of peace and calm, we who do the mitzvot will enjoy that 100 times more. On another occasion, they, the four sages of the previous story, were coming up to Jerusalem after the destruction of the temple. When they reached the Mount of Tzofim and were able to see the city of Jerusalem and its destruction, they rent their garments, right? Just like a mourner tears his clothing. Here they saw the destruction that was once upon a time the Holy Temple, and they quite literally ripped their clothing. When they came to the Temple Mount, they saw a fox emerging from the Holy of Holies, and they started to weep. Right? Wild animals have overtaken the holiest place in all the world. That's how bad it had gotten. But Rabbi Akiva smiled. They said to him, "For what reason are you smiling?" And he replied to them, "For what reason are you weeping?" They said to him, "A place about which it is written, the non-Kohen who approaches shall die. And now foxes prowl over it? Should we not weep?" Right? They referred to the Torah and said the Holy of Holies was so holy that only a Kohen could go close to it. Only the most holiest of the Jewish people could go close to it. And here, a fox. Wild animals are running over it. Shouldn't we cry about that? That's how bad things have gotten. Rabbi Akiva then explained why he was smiling. He said to them, "For this very reason I am smiling, for it is written, I will summon trustworthy witnesses for myself," God says. The two prophets, Uriah the Kohen and Zechariah ben Yevarachehu. Now what connection does Uriah have with Zechariah? Uriah prophesied during the era of the first temple, whereas Zechariah prophesied during the era of the second temple. Why are they mentioned together? Rather, by mentioning the two prophets together, Scripture made the prophecy of Zechariah dependent upon the prophecy of Uriah. And the prophecy of Uriah is written, "Therefore, because of you, Zion will be plowed over like a field. Jerusalem will become heaps of rubble, and the Temple Mount will become like stone heaps in the forest." In the prophecy of Zechariah, it is written, "Old men and old women will once again sit in the streets of Jerusalem." So here we read of the prophet Uriah, who said all of these bad things are going to happen to the Jewish people and to the land of Israel. But in Zechariah, who came after, we read, but good things will once again take place. Will once again be restored to our land. The temple will once again stand. The Jewish people will become strong once again. Rabbi Akiva concludes, "As long as the prophecy of Uriah had not been fulfilled, I had feared that the prophecy of Zechariah would not be fulfilled. Now that the prophecy of Uriah has been fulfilled, and Jerusalem and the Temple Mount are totally desolate, it is certain that the prophecy of Zechariah will be fulfilled." What does that mean in English? In the days of Uriah, he prophesied that the temple would be destroyed, that the Jewish people would be exiled. But in the days of Zechariah, he prophesied that the Jewish people would return to the land of Israel. Peace and calm, security and freedom would prevail once again. Rabbi Akiva says it happened once, that the Jews were exiled, but returned to the land and built the second temple. Rabbi Akiva teaches, just as that happened once that we were exiled and returned, so too now that the second temple is destroyed and we're exiled, will we once again return to the promised land? Will we once again live to see a day where the land of Israel and the people of Israel shall live in peace and security? And that's why Rabbi Akiva was smiling when all of our ancestors were weeping. Rabbi Akiva held out hope. He held out faith in a better tomorrow, in a peaceful Israel, in a strong Jewish people. Why is Rabbi Akiva considered one of the greatest sages of all time? Certainly because of his Torah learning, but I think also because of his faith and his hope. And there's no better statement about somebody who is truly free than they are one who possesses hope. A slave has no hope. A slave has no vision and a promise of a better tomorrow. A free person, no matter how bad it is, still maintains hope, the dream of a better tomorrow. So it is that we come back to the longest Seder. A tale of Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Elazar, son of Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Tarfon, that they were reclining at the Seder in Bnei Barak, and they spent the whole night long telling the story of the going out of Egypt, until their pupils came and said to them, "Our masters, it is time to recite the morning Shema." These 5 rabbis were hiding in a cave. They weren't sitting in luxury in Akiva's house. They were hiding in a dark cave underground, and they didn't know that light had come up. And so it was time to say the morning Shema. Rather, their students came to them and said, "We know you're hiding. The day is upon us." And not just as a daytime and time to say the morning Shema, but it's time for the Bar Kokhba rebellion to begin. This is code. The students saying to these rabbis, not just a halachic statement about Shema. It's code that the rebellion is about to begin. A new day is upon. We read this story each and every year at the Passover Seder to remind ourselves, the Chol Dor Vador, in each and every generation, a person should see himself as if he's coming out of slavery and into freedom, as if he's coming out of oppression and fighting for all of those who suffer. That's what we have to do in our own day and age. Each and every year at the Seder, ask ourselves, who among us, who around us, who within this world are suffering, are oppressed, are enslaved? And what are we going to do about it? How are we going to rise up to care for those who are in need? How are we going to fight the struggle of those who are oppressed? How are we going to join the ranks and partner with God in bringing freedom to all who are enslaved? In each and every generation, our people have known suffering. And in each and every generation, God finds a way to give us freedom. What are you going to do? What are we going to do to partner with God to bring that freedom for the Jewish people, to bring that hope that Rabbi Akiva brought in his generation and brings in our generation? What are you going to do to make Pesach real this year? That in each and every generation, we should feel as if we ourselves have come out of slavery into freedom. Adonai Ozi Amo Yitain, Adonai Yivarech et Amo Mashalom. May God grant us strength. May God grant us peace. May God grant us a day when not just one bagel should fall from the heavens, but bagels for everybody. Shabbat Shalom and Chag Shalom. Chag Sameach, beautiful Sunday morning to everybody. Of course, now 2 nights in a row we have filled a cup of Elijah on the table. We've sung Eliyahu Hanavi. We've opened the door and waited for Elijah the prophet to come. Who in the world is Elijah the prophet? And why does he play such an important role on Passover? Now, it seems that the earliest of staters did not have maybe much of Elijah mentioned. In fact, the Talmud itself, as it's laying out Passover night, seems to have some disagreement as to whether there are 4 cups of wine or 5 cups of wine. What's the answer? Do we do 4 cups of wine or 5 cups of wine? At least 4. And one you put on the table as the 5th cup, which you don't drink from. Now, how do we resolve this dilemma in the Talmud between the 4 cups of wine and the 5 cups of wine? And the rabbis, in very good fashion, debate, and finally say, aha, we'll drink 4 cups, we'll put a 5th one on the table, and when Elijah the prophet comes heralding the era of the Messiah, he will answer for us the question whether we should be drinking this 5th cup or not. And that's how the 5th cup became known as Kos Eliyahu, as Elijah's cup. Not because of some messianic ideal that night he's going to go from house to house drinking up all of the wine, unless you were very thirsty, but rather he was going to resolve the dilemma of should we drink 4 cups or 5 cups. It wasn't until much later that we really embraced the idea of Elijah coming to each of our seders on Passover night and checking to see whether we're ready for the messianic era to begin. So who is Eliyahu Hanavi? Who is Elijah the prophet? We know from the book of Malachi, the book of Malachi. See, the prophet tells us, I will send you the prophet Elijah before the coming of that great and dreadful day of the Lord. That's how it's come to be that Elijah is believed to be the harbinger of the Messiah. Right? Elijah is not the Messiah himself, but Elijah is going to come in first announcing the coming of the Messiah. Elijah will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children and the hearts of their children to their parents. Right? Everybody will be reconciled again. So that when I come, I do not strike the whole land with utter destruction. When the Messiah comes, the world needs to be ready for him. And it's Elijah's job to come in first and tell everybody that the Messiah is on his way. Elijah the prophet, Eliyahu Hanavi. Elijah plays a prominent role in the book of Kings. And indeed, he is the prophet. We know that there is somewhat of a balance of power system between the monarchy and the prophet in ancient times, with the prophet often coming to put the monarchy in check, so that the monarch never has absolute power. Isaiah lived in the times of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel, which of course we know was a time when the Jews really left their Judaism, and we had quite an evil king and queen on the throne. And so Elijah comes in this time and goes around from town to town performing miracles. He heals the sick. He cures someone of leprosy. He resurrects the dead. Elijah is quite a miracle worker. And so it is, of course, that any miracle worker comes to be a threat to the king and queen. And so they try to take him on. And Elijah comes and says, God, you decide between us, between me, and between them. And a big test takes place, and ultimately God comes very clearly down on the side of Elijah. And Elijah begins to turn the tide so that people once again see God's power, return to monotheism, and restore their Judaism. Elijah is this unbelievable miracle worker and major prophet among the Jewish people. And here we are now at the end of his life. I'm reading from the section called 2 Kings chapter 2. When the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind, Elijah and his student prophet, like a student rabbi, David, his student prophet, Elisha, were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, the Lord has sent me to Bethel." But Elisha said, "As sure as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you, my teacher." So they went down together to Bethel. The company of the prophets at Bethel came out to Elisha and asked, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" And they were all expecting his death. "Yes, I know," Elisha replied. "So be quiet." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, Elisha. The Lord has sent me to Jericho." Probably not the casino. And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went to Jericho. The company of the prophets at Jericho went up to Elisha and asked him, "Do you know that the Lord's going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," he replied. "So be quiet." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here. The Lord has sent me to the Jordan River." And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So the two of the men walked on. 50 men now from the company of the prophets went and stood at a distance, facing the place where Eliyahu and where Elijah and Elisha had stopped in the Jordan. Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the water with it. The water divided to the right and to the left, and the two of them crossed over on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me, what can I do for you before I'm taken from you?" "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit," Elisha replied. Right? Elisha wanted to be this great prophet, this great miracle, like Elijah was, even able to part waters like Moses. "You have asked a difficult thing," Elijah said. "Yet if you see me when I'm taken from you, it will be yours. Otherwise it will not." As they were walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them. And Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha saw this and cried out, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel." And Elisha saw him no more. Then he took hold of his garment and tore it in two in the sight of the Lord. Elisha then picked up Elijah's cloak that had fallen from him and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. He took that cloak that had fallen from Elijah and struck the water with it. "Where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" he asked. When Elisha struck the water, it divided to the right and to the left, and he crossed over. Did Eliyahu, did Elijah the prophet die? No. He was carried up to heaven on a chariot of fire. And because of that, our tradition comes to teach that Eliyahu has never died. And that's why he has the ability to come back and tell us when the Messiah has arrived. And so story after story in the Talmud comes to tell us of Elijah the prophet returning to earth, speaking with the rabbis, giving them hope, helping them see insight into God's ways. And there are books upon books written about some of the stories that have evolved over time, legends and fables about Eliyahu, Elijah the prophet, the incredible power that he has, the special relationship with God that he had, and how each and every day we wait and we anticipate the coming of Eliyahu, Elijah the prophet. Now, on what day of the week will Elijah not come? He won't come on Shabbos. He rests on Shabbos. But the moment Shabbos is over, we anticipate that this might be the week that he comes. heralding in the days of the Messiah. And how do we show our anticipation that this might be the week that he comes? We conclude Havdalah by singing the Eliyahu. At the Passover Seder, the time of the greatest redemption, we remind ourselves that in each and every generation we're supposed to see ourselves in that place, and we too are supposed to have the hope that one day, maybe in our time, Bimhei Rabbi Amenu, Elijah will come, telling us the Messiah is on his way. And that's why at Pesach time, we now have more than just a cup of Elijah at our Seder table, but we incorporate the song Eliyahu Hanavi into our Seders as another way to add to our anticipation, our hope, that a time of peace, a time of freedom, a time of religious renewal will once again come. Bimhei Rabbi Amenu, in our day and age. Now immediately after we sing Eliyahu Hanavi, we come to this section of the Haggadah called Shfoch Chamatcha, pour out your wrath. A late addition to the Haggadah after the period of the Crusades and the pogroms of the Rhineland. The Crusades were a series of military conflicts, of course, of religious character waged by Christians, usually sanctioned by the Pope. The First Crusade was launched in 1095 by Pope Urban II, with the dual goals of liberating the sacred city of Jerusalem and the Holy Land from Muslims, and freeing the Eastern Christians from Muslim rule. Inevitably, the Crusades also involved destruction and oppression of Jewish communities in Europe and the Holy Land. The harshness of this section often causes it to be excluded or skipped in many a modern Seder. Nevertheless, immediately after hoping for Elijah the prophet, we say in the Haggadah, God, pour out your fury on the nations that do not know you, upon the kingdoms that do not invoke your name. They have devoured Jacob and desolated his home. Pour out your wrath on them. May your blazing anger overtake them. Pursue them in wrath and destroy them from under the heavens of the Lord. So much came out of the days of the Crusades. Thousands upon thousands of Jews were killed, hurt, murdered, stolen from. This prayer gets added to the Haggadah about 1,000 years ago. And our rabbis saw a need for a communal opportunity for mourning. A communal opportunity for mourning. So they create a new service and add it to our festival calendar. That new service they created coming out of the Crusades is called Yisker. And that's the birth of Yisker. It was a communal mourning opportunity following the Crusades and when so many people lost lives. Now the rabbis in good rabbinic fashion asked, where should we put this holiday of Yisker? And they said, we've really been having a hard time getting people to shul. On the last day of Sukkot, on the last day of Passover, and on the second day of Shavuos. So guess when Yisker is now? The last day of Sukkot, the last day of Passover, and the second day of Shavuot. And guess what? It worked. It brought people back to shul. That's the birth of Yisker. Each and every week, and each and every year at Passover time, we sing Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, hoping for a day when God will send this amazing prophet back to earth, heralding in a time of great peace, a time of hope, a time of freedom, a time of religious reformation and restoration. May we live to see that day, Bimhei Rabbi Amenu, when Elijah the prophet comes, brings us back to the land of Israel, and the entire world knows peace. May this be God's will, and let us say together.
Amen.